The story of Leonardo da Vinci, the defining spirit of the Italian Renaissance, begins not in the clamor of a grand city, but in the quiet, pastoral hills of Tuscany. His life, an extraordinary fusion of art, science, and relentless curiosity, was from the start a testament to the power of observation and the rejection of conventional boundaries. Leonardo was born on April 15, 1452 AC, in the village of Anciano, near the town of Vinci, which provided the name he would carry through history. His birth was technically illegitimate. His father was Ser Piero da Vinci, a wealthy legal notary who belonged to a well-established, successful family. His mother was Caterina, a young woman of simple peasant background whose identity remains partially shrouded in mystery, though she is widely believed to have been a farm laborer. This unique, non-traditional parentage profoundly shaped Leonardo's early life and perhaps his intellectual path. He was initially raised by his mother, but was soon brought into the household of his paternal grandfather in Vinci, where he spent his formative years. Crucially, the circumstances of his birth meant that he received no formal university education and was, therefore, not subjected to the rigid, highly formalized scholastic curriculum based on Latin and classical texts that defined the education of his contemporaries. This apparent handicap became, in fact, one of his greatest strengths. Unburdened by the authority of ancient texts, Leonardo was forced to rely entirely on his own senses and empirical investigation. His mind was free from inherited knowledge, turning him into a relentless questioner of nature itself. He would later proudly refer to himself as homo sine literis, a man without letters, asserting that experience was the only true master. His childhood in the Tuscan countryside was steeped in the observation of the natural world. This was the first, and perhaps most important, of his lifelong practices. His early notebooks, though now lost, surely contained observations of the intricate flight of birds, the flow patterns of water in streams, and the complex anatomy of plants and trees. These detailed observations laid the groundwork for his revolutionary scientific approach decades later. By the age of 14, recognizing the undeniable artistic talent of his son, Ser Piero took Leonardo to Florence, the cultural and intellectual epicenter of the early Renaissance. This city, under the influential patronage of the Medici family, was a vibrant crucible of new ideas, wealth, and artistic competition. In Florence around 1466 AC, Leonardo was apprenticed to Andrea del Verrocchio, a leading sculptor, goldsmith, and painter of the time. Verrocchio's workshop was the quintessential Renaissance bottega, a bustling, multidisciplinary hub where apprentices learned far more than just painting. They were taught bronze casting, metalworking, mechanics, chemistry, leatherwork, and crucially, anatomical drawing. Verrocchio himself was a master of combining technical skill with intellectual curiosity. Under his guidance, Leonardo gained a practical, hands-on education in the mechanics of creation, a contrast to the theoretical training favored by older masters. The discipline required in Verrocchio's workshop was rigorous. Leonardo learned to grind pigments, prepare panels, handle brushes, and master the demanding technique of fresco painting. He absorbed the fundamental principles of perspective and composition that were then being rapidly developed in Florence. The young Leonardo's talent quickly began to eclipse that of his master. His participation in Verrocchio's large commissions is often difficult to definitively prove, but one early work provides a powerful glimpse into his nascent genius, the baptism of Christ. In this altarpiece, painted around 1472 AC, Leonardo is widely credited with painting the kneeling angel on the far left. The difference between the angel painted by the young apprentice and the rest of the painting is striking. Leonardo's angel possesses a softness and emotional depth, its hair rendered with a flowing, naturalistic lightness that surpasses the harder, more conventional style of Verrocchio. Legend holds that upon seeing the quality of his pupil's work, Verrocchio was so humbled that he vowed never to paint again, dedicating himself solely to sculpture. Another work from this early period, the Annunciation, circa 1472-75 AC, showcases Leonardo's early mastery of aerial perspective, where objects in the distance appear paler and less distinct. More importantly, it demonstrates his innovative approach to anatomy and composition. He painted the Virgin Mary with a sense of quiet, psychological intensity, reflecting the philosophical emphasis on human emotion that would define the High Renaissance. By 1472 AC, Leonardo was formally admitted to the Guild of St. Luke, the Florentine Artists' Guild, officially marking him as an independent master painter. However, his nature was already showing its characteristic restlessness. For the next 5 years, few large commissions are recorded, suggesting he was already dedicating significant time to his own independent, wide-ranging studies. His first major commission as an independent master was the Adoration of the Mages, commissioned by the monks of San Donato, Escopedo, around 1481 AC. This unfinished masterpiece is a chaotic, dynamic study of complex human emotion and dramatic composition. The central vortex of figures, all reacting in awe and confusion to the young Christ, demonstrates Leonardo's intention to use painting as a vehicle for psychological narrative. The work, abandoned when he left Florence, remains a blueprint for his later revolutionary compositions. During this Florentine period, Leonardo's famous habit of journaling and note-taking began in earnest. His notebooks were not dedicated solely to art, but were an indiscriminate record of his mind's processes, anatomical sketches next to shopping lists, complex mechanical designs next to philosophical musings written in his signature mirror writing, a peculiar left-handed script that ran from right to left, making the notes difficult for others to read. The primary force driving his departure from Florence was the overwhelming intellectual gravity of the Medici court, which, while rich, was less interested in the empirical, technical investigations that captivated Leonardo. He sought a patron who valued his abilities not just as a painter, but as an engineer, inventor, and military strategist. This search for a truly multidisciplinary environment led him to write his famous letter of self-introduction around 1482 AC to Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan. This document, one of the most remarkable job applications in history, listed 10 of his skills before even mentioning painting. He presented himself as a master of military engineering, bridge and cannon design, siege warfare, and architecture, concluding almost as an afterthought that he could also paint and sculpt as well as anyone. The decision to move to Milan marked the end of his foundational period and the beginning of his maturity as a universal mind, a period where his revolutionary vision for a giant bronze monument would occupy his mind for decades, even as he completed one of the most mysterious and haunting works of his early career. The decision to move to Milan in 1482 AC marked the end of Leonardo da Vinci's foundational period and the beginning of his maturity as a universal mind. This new chapter, spent under the patronage of Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan, would last for nearly 2 decades, transforming Leonardo from a gifted painter into the multidisciplinary genius history remembers. Leonardo presented himself to Sforza not primarily as an artist, but as a master of arms and engineering. Milan, situated in the fertile and strategically crucial Lombardy plain, required constant attention to defense, irrigation, and urban planning. Sforza's court was less focused on the purely philosophical and classical ideals of the Florentine Renaissance, and more on practical power, military strength, and technical innovation, a perfect environment for Leonardo's empirical mind. His duties in Milan were astonishingly varied, demonstrating Sforza's faith in his diverse talents. He served as a court engineer, architect, designer of court festivals, and only secondarily as a painter. As a military engineer, Leonardo spent considerable time designing new forms of defensive architecture and offensive weaponry. His notebooks from this period are filled with sketches that were centuries ahead of their time, ideas born from pure mechanical necessity, and an unparalleled understanding of dynamics and force. He designed, for instance, early prototypes of machine guns, multi-barreled cannons arranged in fan-like formations, large mobile scaling ladders for sieges, and armored fighting vehicles, the conceptual ancestor of the modern tank. His designs for artillery were meant to improve range and speed of deployment. While many of these radical designs were never built, either due to complexity or lack of necessary material technology, they reveal a mind dedicated to solving kinetic and structural problems with fundamental scientific principles. As a civil and hydrological engineer, Leonardo was deeply involved in the water management of the region. Lombardy is crisscrossed by canals and rivers, essential for irrigation and transport. He developed detailed plans for canal systems and locks, using principles of fluid mechanics to manage water flow and elevation changes. His designs for sluice gates and dredging machines were essential for keeping Milan's waterways navigable and for preventing floods. This meticulous study of hydrodynamics, the behavior of water, would become a lifelong obsession, influencing his scientific drawings and even the swirling, turbulent backgrounds of his paintings. Yet despite his prodigious engineering workload, the central artistic task of his Milanese period was the Sforza Equestrian Monument, a colossal bronze statue intended to honor Ludovico Sforza's father, Francesco. The scale of this project, known simply as the Gran Cavallo, the Great Horse, consumed Leonardo for nearly 12 years, from approximately 1488 AC to 1499 AC. This monument was designed to be the largest bronze equestrian statue ever created, standing approximately 23 feet high. The technical challenges were immense, demanding an unprecedented level of skill in casting and metallurgy. Leonardo dedicated hundreds of pages in his notebooks to the anatomy and movement of horses, culminating in studies of the complex mathematics and engineering required to support such a vast weight of bronze on only 3 legs. He successfully completed a full-size clay model of the horse in 1493 AC. This clay masterpiece, admired by all of Milan, required nearly 80 tons of bronze for the final casting, more bronze than was available in the city, or indeed the region. Tragically, the bronze, gathered for the monumental casting was diverted by Sforza in 1494 AC to be used for cannons to defend Milan against the impending invasion by the French. The clay model itself was later destroyed by French archers, who used it for target practice after they captured Milan in 1489 AC. The failure to cast the Gran Cavallo was one of the greatest disappointments of Leonardo's career, an agonizing symbol of the conflict between pure art and political necessity. Amidst these colossal engineering and sculptural ambitions, Leonardo found time for painting, producing some of his most defining works. The Virgin of the Rocks, La Virgine de la Roche, was painted in two distinct versions, one in the 1480s and another around 1508. The first version, commissioned for the Confraternity of the Immaculate Conception, introduced several revolutionary elements to painting. First was the innovative use of composition, arranging the figures, the Virgin Mary, the infant Christ, the infant Saint John the Baptist, and an angel in a pyramidal structure, grounding the figures in stability and classical balance, a technique that would become a standard of the High Renaissance. Second, and more importantly, was his atmospheric technique known as sfumato, pronounced sfumatoi, Italian for smoky. Sfumato is the subtle, almost imperceptible blurring of colors and tones, eliminating harsh outlines and allowing forms to emerge gradually from shadow, giving the figures a mysterious, thus lifelike softness, and creating a deep sense of atmosphere and psychological distance. The technique, perfectly demonstrated in the haunting dim grotto where the figures reside, became one of Leonardo's artistic hallmarks. The culmination of his work in Milan, and arguably the most important painting of the Renaissance, was the Last Supper, Il Cenacolo. Commissioned for the refectory wall of the Santa Maria delle Grazie monastery, Leonardo worked on it from approximately 1495 AC to 1498 AC. The Last Supper was a radical departure from traditional representations of the scene, which typically showed the apostles seated in a rigid, passive line. Leonardo chose the moment immediately after Christ announces, "One of you shall betray me." This choice allowed him to explore the human psychological reaction to a moment of immense crisis. The painting is a masterwork of psychological realism and controlled chaos. The apostles are arranged in 4 groups of 3, each group reacting differently, some in denial, some in shock, some in confusion. Peter, impetuous and fiery, leans towards John. Judas Iscariot, isolated in shadow, clutches the bag of silver. Leonardo used the arrangement and posture of the apostles to reveal their inner states, effectively inventing the modern concept of psychological portraiture. Furthermore, Leonardo did not use the traditional fresco technique, painting rapidly onto wet plaster, because he found it too restrictive. Instead, he experimented with a mixture of tempera and oil paint applied to a dry wall, allowing him to work slowly and meticulously, achieving the subtle shading of sfumato. This technical innovation, however, proved disastrous. The paint began to flake and decay almost immediately after its completion, turning the masterpiece into a perpetual challenge of conservation, a physical representation of Leonardo's persistent technical restlessness. The 2 decades in Milan were not only artistically rich, but cemented Leonardo's scientific reputation. He utilized his access to the court's library and scholars, initiating his deep, systematic study of human anatomy, which he conducted through early pioneering dissections. He meticulously studied optics, acoustics, and geometry, always seeking the fundamental laws that governed the natural world, forever bridging the gap between artistic representation and empirical science. This period of unparalleled output and intellectual diversity came to an abrupt, violent end in 1499 AC, when the French king Louis XIII invaded Milan and overthrew Ludovico Sforza. Left without a patron, financially depleted, and having seen his great horse model destroyed, Leonardo was forced to flee. This pivotal moment marked the beginning of his nomadic period, where he would travel across Italy, serving different, often demanding patrons, and carrying the seeds of his greatest scientific works with him. The abrupt end of the Milanese period in 1499 AC, triggered by the French invasion and the downfall of Ludovico Sforza, forced Leonardo da Vinci into a decade of relentless travel and diverse, often high-pressure employment. This nomadic interlude, spanning roughly 1500 AC to 1506 AC, was characterized by an intense artistic rivalry, deep political engagement, and the creation of his most psychologically penetrating portrait. In the year 1500 AC, after a brief period of traveling with the mathematician Luca Pacioli, Leonardo returned to Florence, the city of his apprenticeship. The artistic landscape of Florence had shifted dramatically in his absence. While Leonardo, now nearly 50, represented the established, experimental genius of the older generation, two brilliant, volatile young masters had risen to prominence: Michelangelo Buonarroti and Raphael Sanzio. The rivalry with Michelangelo became one of the defining and often stressful elements of Leonardo's time in Florence. The two men were antithetical in temperament, style, and philosophy. Leonardo was reserved, elegant, and primarily concerned with the internal, psychological life and the flow of nature. Michelangelo was volatile, fiercely individualistic, and obsessed with the external, dramatic physicality of the human form. Their artistic competition culminated in a direct commission from the Florentine government to paint colossal murals facing each other in the Hall of 500, Salone dei Cinquecento, in the Palazzo Vecchio. Leonardo was commissioned to depict the Battle of Anghiari, a Florentine victory over Milan, in 1440 AC, and Michelangelo was commissioned to paint the Battle of Cassina. This was intended to be a public, direct contest between the two greatest living artists. Leonardo's design for the Battle of Anghiari was a composition of staggering, primal energy, a central swirling mass of intertwined horses and men fighting violently over a banner, designed to capture the fury and madness of war. He experimented yet again with a problematic technical method, attempting to use an oil-based medium mixed with wax that could be set by heat, a technique described by Pliny. The attempt failed catastrophically. The colors melted and ran under the heat, forcing him to abandon the entire project, leaving only a few initial sections completed. Michelangelo's cartoon for the Battle of Cassina, depicting soldiers startled while bathing, was also never executed on the wall, but the power of the designs for both battles, which circulated through the city, made them legendary and influential, even in their unfinished state. The failure of the Battle of Anghiari served as yet another example of Leonardo's relentless scientific curiosity overriding practical artistic success. During this period, Leonardo also executed his two most famous female portraits, the Lady with the Ermine, which he brought from Milan, and the Mona Lisa. The Mona Lisa, La Gioconda, Painted between roughly 1503 AC and 1506 AC, is arguably the most famous painting in the world and the culmination of his psychological portraiture. The subject is widely believed to be Lisa Gherardini, the wife of a wealthy Florentine cloth merchant, Francesco del Giocondo. The painting is renowned for several innovations that captured the elusive nature of life and personality. The smile. The smile is famously ambiguous, achieved by Leonardo's masterful use of sfumato at the corners of the mouth and eyes, blurring the edges just enough so that the viewer's perception of the emotion changes slightly based on where their gaze rests. This technique turns the portrait into a dynamic, shifting psychological experience. The pose. Lisa is positioned in a three-quarter profile, which was common, but Leonardo gives her an unprecedented sense of intimate engagement with the viewer. The slight tilt of the head and the relaxed yet poised placement of the hands project a startling confidence and poise. The landscape. The background is a mysterious, misty geological fantasy painted in muted blues and greens using aerial perspective. The contrasting, almost alien landscape further enhances the subject's detachment and timelessness, suggesting a deep connection between human existence and the turbulent forces of nature. Leonardo never delivered the Mona Lisa to its commissioner. He considered it a personal, ongoing study and carried it with him for the rest of his life, continuously working on the glazing and shadows, refining the sfumato to achieve the perfect illusion of life. The political volatility of the era briefly drew Leonardo away from his artistic duties in Florence. From 1502 AC to 1503 AC, he took the most unusual appointment of his career, serving as the chief military engineer and architect for Cesare Borgia, the notoriously ruthless son of Pope Alexander VI, who was then attempting to carve out his own powerful state in central Italy. Serving Borgia was an intense, high-stakes experience that provided Leonardo with unparalleled access to the territories he wished to study. This period was crucial for his scientific development, particularly in cartography and civil engineering. As Borgia's engineer, Leonardo's duties involved surveying the lands, planning strategic defenses, and designing new fortifications. This required him to create exceptionally accurate maps of the newly conquered regions. His maps, such as the famous map of Imola, were revolutionary. He developed an entirely new, scientific method of cartography, utilizing an instrument for precise angular measurement and depicting cities and territories with an aerial view, offering a level of geometrical accuracy never before seen in European mapmaking. The access to Borgia's command structure also allowed Leonardo to pursue his obsession with hydrology and urban planning. He prepared extensive, detailed plans for the complete reorganization of Florence and other cities, envisioning a multi-level city with segregated pedestrian and vehicular traffic, advanced sanitation systems, and wide, rationally designed streets, a response to the plague and urban chaos he had witnessed. These visionary concepts, though never implemented, demonstrated his commitment to applying rational, scientific principles to human welfare. However, the nature of Borgia's brutal campaign, marked by treachery and political murder, likely conflicted with Leonardo's inherent humanitarian tendencies. When Borgia's power rapidly collapsed following the death of his father, the Pope, in 1503 AC, Leonardo was once again forced to seek a new, stable patronage, briefly returning to his rivalry with Michelangelo in Florence, before accepting new commissions that would eventually draw him back to Milan, now under the relatively stable governance of the French. The nomadic period solidified a crucial pattern in Leonardo's career. His greatest finished works were often created in moments of instability, like the Mona Lisa, while his greatest scientific and technical breakthroughs were often made in the service of military or civic necessity, like the Imola map and his designs for canal locks. His restlessness was the fuel for his universal curiosity, constantly exposing him to new problems and challenging his empirical observation. This pursuit of fundamental knowledge would soon lead him to the most intense phase of his anatomical studies, seeking to unlock the inner structure of the human mechanism. The nomadic period solidified a crucial pattern in Leonardo da Vinci's career. His greatest finished works were often created in moments of instability, while his greatest scientific and technical breakthroughs were often made in the service of military or civic necessity. His relentless curiosity, constantly exposing him to new problems, would soon lead him to the most intense and groundbreaking phase of his intellectual life. The systematic study of human anatomy, seeking to unlock the inner structure of the human mechanism. Leonardo's engagement with anatomy began early in Verrocchio's workshop, where artists needed basic knowledge to accurately depict the external body. However, around 1507 AC, his interest escalated into an almost maniacal scientific pursuit, far exceeding the requirements of painting. His goal was nothing less than to create the definitive visual encyclopedia of the human body, a work he intended to publish, but which tragically remained in manuscript form. His dedication to this empirical science was extraordinary and often harrowing. Defying the deeply ingrained religious and social taboos of the era, Leonardo personally performed what are estimated to be around 30 full human dissections over the course of his career, working in hospitals and medical schools in Florence, Milan, and Rome. The conditions for this work were brutal. Without modern preservation methods, he was often forced to work rapidly in secret, frequently during the cold of winter, on cadavers that were often decaying rapidly. He faced the immense difficulty of dissecting structures as fine as nerves, capillaries, and internal organs without the aid of magnification tools. Leonardo's revolutionary method, however, was his approach to visual recording. Unlike his contemporary medical illustrators, who often relied on schematics or crude copies of ancient texts, Leonardo treated anatomy as an engineering problem. His drawings were not just static illustrations. They were detailed, layered visualizations designed to explain the function and mechanics of the body. His anatomical notebooks contain over 750 detailed drawings, categorized and grouped by system, including his pioneering work on osteology, bones. He meticulously rendered the human skeleton, correctly documenting the curvature of the spine and the joint connections with a precision that surpassed the published work of anatomists for decades. Myology, muscles. He employed an ingenious technique of drawing muscles in 3 dimensions, using cross-sections and exploded views to show the relationship between deep and superficial muscle groups, illustrating how they interact to produce specific movements. He viewed the muscles as the ropes of the body's mechanism. The cardiovascular system. His studies of the heart were centuries ahead of their time. He correctly identified the 4 chambers and described the function of the aortic valve as preventing blood from flowing backward. Crucially, to understand the complex fluid dynamics, he built a glass model of the heart and injected it with wax, allowing him to visualize the path of the blood flow, essentially inventing a form of medical simulation. Perhaps the most astonishing of his anatomical pursuits was his work on the brain and the senses. He rejected the medieval belief that the soul and senses resided in a single part of the brain. He systematically attempted to map the cerebral ventricles, initially by injecting them with soft wax or molten material to create a perfect cast, a technique never before conceived. He sought to locate the senso commune, the common sense, the supposed seat of judgment and perception, and theorized that all sensory input converged at a single point in the brain. His detailed drawings of the human fetus in the womb remain masterpieces of both art and science. Based on the dissection of pregnant cadavers, he captured the position and structure of the uterus and the fetus with remarkable accuracy, illustrating the fetus in a position of natural repose, showing a deep curiosity about the origins of human life. Leonardo's investigations extended into comparative anatomy. He dissected animals, monkeys, horses, bears, and frogs to understand analogous structures and infer function in areas of the human body that were difficult to examine, such as the skeletal structure of the horse's foot, to understand the biomechanics of human movement. The connection between his scientific research and his art was direct and profound. His anatomical studies allowed him to solve critical artistic problems, motion and expression. His deep understanding of the facial muscles, which he painstakingly mapped, allowed him to capture the subtle, fleeting expressions, the smile of the Mona Lisa, the shock in the Last Supper, with unparalleled psychological realism. He believed that the artist must understand the hidden anatomy of the emotions. Ideal proportion. The anatomical studies gave rise to his famous drawing of the Vitruvian Man, executed around 1490 AC. This drawing, based on the geometrical principles of the Roman architect Vitruvius, illustrates the ideal human figure with arms and legs extended, perfectly inscribed within both a circle and a square. This work symbolizes the Renaissance ideal, the human body as the key to understanding the mathematical and structural harmony of the universe. In his notebooks, Leonardo repeatedly asserted that the painter needed to be the scientist of the visible world. An artist could not successfully capture grace, sprezzatura, or effortless ease, or life, modo del animo, or the movement of the soul, without a profound underlying knowledge of the mechanical forces at play beneath the skin. The final, soft rendering of his oil paintings was merely the surface of a far deeper scientific inquiry. Tragically, this immense body of anatomical research, which could have revolutionized medical science during the 16th century, was never published. Due to his own reluctance to organize and formalize his findings, the difficulty of printing such complex, multi-layered illustrations, and the eventual political chaos of his final years, the notebooks remained locked away. They were only rediscovered centuries later, meaning that much of his pioneering anatomical insight had to be independently discovered by others, notably Andreas Vesalius, decades later. His anatomical works stand as a towering testament to his empirical rigor and his belief that observation, drawing, and dissection were all aspects of a singular pursuit, the comprehension of the universal design. This pursuit of underlying principles would soon lead him back to the macroscopic world, examining the ultimate source of life and motion, the flow of water, and the forces of geology. Leonardo da Vinci's anatomical works stand as a towering testament to his empirical rigor and his belief that observation, drawing, and dissection were all aspects of a singular pursuit, the comprehension of the universal design. This pursuit of underlying principles would soon lead him back to the macroscopic world, examining the ultimate source of life and motion, the flow of water, and the forces of geology. Leonardo viewed the Earth not as a static backdrop, but as a vast living organism, a macrocosm mirroring the human body, the microcosm. If blood flowed through the veins of man, he reasoned, then water must flow through the veins of the earth. This analogy fueled his decades-long, obsessive investigation into hydrology, the study of water, and geology, the study of the Earth's structure. His studies in fluid dynamics are some of the most scientifically rigorous and beautifully illustrated sections of his notebooks. Leonardo was determined to understand the fundamental laws that governed water's movement, recognizing that this was keys to both engineering and understanding natural processes like weather and erosion. He meticulously documented the behavior of water, how it forms eddies and vortices, how turbulence arises, and how the shape of a riverbed influences the speed and force of the current. His drawings of swirling water, often rendered with mesmerizing detail, were not merely artistic flourishes. They were scientific attempts to visually capture kinetic energy and fluid properties. He developed and recorded concepts related to momentum and buoyancy, long before these ideas were formalized by later physicists. This deep study informed his practical engineering work on canals and irrigation systems. As noted in his Milan and Borgia years, he designed sophisticated canal locks, weirs, and dredging mechanisms. His designs show a profound understanding that nature must be guided, not fought. For example, he understood that building a dam perpendicular to a river flow would invite rapid erosion, preferring instead to design structures that harmonized with the natural curves of the water's momentum. The most famous, and perhaps most disastrous, application of his hydrological studies was the ambitious project to divert the Arno River around the city of Pisa. Commissioned by the Florentine Republic around 1504 AC, the political goal was to both harm the rival city of Pisa by cutting off its water supply and port access, and improve access for Florence to the sea. The technical challenge, however, was immense. Leonardo, partnering with Niccolò Machiavelli, then a high-ranking official, surveyed the entire region, creating detailed topographical maps that provided the basis for the proposed canal. Leonardo's plan involved digging a massive, high-elevation canal to permanently reroute the river. While his preliminary hydrological calculations were theoretically sound, the sheer scale of the earthworks, the unforeseen geological instability of the soil, and the logistical challenges of managing a massive, hastily organized workforce led to failure. The project was abandoned within months, becoming an expensive political and technical fiasco. Despite the failure, the project was a crucial proving ground for his topographical surveying methods and his theories on erosion and flow dynamics. Leonardo's investigations into geology were equally revolutionary, directly challenging the accepted scholastic and religious doctrines of his time. The dominant European view held that geological features, such as mountains and valleys, were created rapidly by a singular cataclysmic event, such as the biblical flood. Leonardo, however, used empirical observation to arrive at the concept of deep time and uniformitarianism, the idea that the Earth was shaped gradually over immense stretches of time by the same slow forces we observe today: wind, water, and erosion. His primary evidence came from the study of fossils. He frequently encountered fossilized shells and sea creatures high in the Apennine Mountains, and correctly concluded two things that contradicted the prevailing wisdom: rejection of the flood theory. If the shells were deposited by a single global flood, they would be mixed chaotically in the rock. Instead, Leonardo observed that the fossils were often found in discrete layers, strata, arranged as they would be on a natural seabed. This meticulous layering proved that the sediment had been laid down slowly over successive epochs, not by a single violent event. Theory of uplift. To explain why ancient seabeds were now mountain peaks, Leonardo theorized that the mountains themselves must have been slowly uplifted by internal geological forces, a concept remarkably close to modern plate tectonics. He also recognized that rivers, over millions of years, carved their own valleys through slow, constant erosion. He was deeply interested in the composition of the soil, recognizing that the Earth's surface was constantly being stripped down in one place, erosion, and deposited in another, sedimentation. He compared the veins of the Earth, the mineral deposits, to the arteries of the human body, recognizing the constant, circulating nature of the planetary system. This intellectual courage to reject inherited authority, the texts of Pliny, Aristotle, or the Bible, in favor of direct sensory evidence from nature, is the hallmark of Leonardo's scientific method. He insisted that anyone seeking to understand the natural world must go to the mountains, observe the rock strata, and question the established narrative. His extensive notes on geology and water eventually led to an entirely separate, philosophical dimension of his art: the use of chaotic, turbulent backgrounds. The landscapes of the Mona Lisa and the Virgin of the Rocks are often rugged, misty, and geologically strange, reflecting his deep awareness of the Earth's raw, violent power. This serves as a constant, subtle reminder that the individual human being, though the subject of art, is contained within a vast, indifferent, and constantly shifting cosmic environment. The final culmination of his fascination with the destructive forces of nature was the famous series of drawings known as the Deluge Studies. These late works are terrifying, almost abstract visions of the end of the world, rendered through the overwhelming power of water, wind, and storm. These drawings represent a final, emotional fusion of his scientific understanding of hydrodynamics with a profound contemplation of human mortality and the sheer, unstoppable force of the Logos, the rational yet overwhelming design of the universe. As Leonardo moved into his later years, his attention would shift increasingly away from painting commissions and political maneuvering, focusing almost entirely on the organization and synthesis of his vast, scattered scientific research, aiming to leave behind a grand, unified testament to his lifetime of observation and inquiry. As Leonardo da Vinci moved into his later years, his attention would shift increasingly away from painting commissions and political maneuvering, focusing almost entirely on the organization and synthesis of his vast, scattered scientific research, aiming to leave behind a grand, unified testament to his lifetime of observation and inquiry. The next section will explore his late life in Rome and France, detailing his obsession with codifying his scientific knowledge, his visionary designs for flight, and his final days under the devoted patronage of the French king. As Leonardo da Vinci moved into his later years, his attention shifted increasingly away from the transient demands of painting commissions and political maneuvering, focusing almost entirely on the organization and synthesis of his vast, scattered scientific research. His ultimate aim was to leave behind a grand, unified testament to his lifetime of observation and inquiry, a process that occupied his time during his second period in Milan and his subsequent move to Rome. Following the failure of the Arno River project and the end of the rivalry with Michelangelo, Leonardo returned to Milan in 1506 AC, now under the relatively stable governance of the French authorities. This was a period of intense intellectual labor, less focused on producing finished art and more on his scientific treatises. He worked under the patronage of the French governor, Charles d'Amboise, who appreciated his genius and provided him with the necessary resources and quiet. He dedicated himself to consolidating his notes on mathematics, optics, and mechanics, working with young pupils who helped him copy and organize the sprawling manuscripts that were piling up in his studio. It was during this period that he finalized much of his anatomical work and returned to his long-standing obsession, flight. Leonardo's notebooks on aeronautics are among the most celebrated examples of his visionary genius. For him, the study of flight was the ultimate multidisciplinary challenge, requiring knowledge of anatomy, the structure and musculature of birds, mechanics and the design of wings, gears, and propulsion systems, physics, the principles of air resistance, lift, and fluid dynamics, transferred from his studies of water. He understood that to fly, one must first understand why birds do not fall. He dedicated hundreds of pages to meticulous, detailed observations of birds in flight, their wing curvature, the movement of their tail feathers, and how they use air currents to soar. This empirical approach was fundamental. He insisted that any successful flying machine must imitate the natural mechanics of living creatures. He rejected the simple notion of flapping wings as too inefficient for human muscle power. His designs evolved from the purely ornithopter, flapping wing concepts to more sophisticated glider and helicopter prototypes. Among his most famous aerial concepts are the ornithopter, designed to mimic the natural flapping of a bird using a combination of levers, pulleys, and foot pedals to amplify the force of the human operator. The aerial screw, a design considered the conceptual precursor to the modern helicopter. It featured a large revolving screw-like canvas structure intended to compress air and provide lift. He theorized that if the structure was spun fast enough, it could bore its way into the air. The parachute. He famously sketched a design for a rigid, pyramidal structure covered in sealed linen, noting that if a man is provided with a length of canvas 10 yards wide, he can jump from any great height without suffering any injury. This design was proven viable centuries later, demonstrating his correct understanding of air resistance and drag. His theoretical work on flight was not confined to design. He established crucial aerodynamic principles. He described the center of gravity and the necessity of maintaining balance in flight. He also recognized the difficulty of the transition from a flapping motion to a gliding one, understanding that stability was as crucial as lift. The renewed French interest in his work led to a period of stability, but this was disrupted by political shifts that pushed him to Rome. In 1513 AC, at the age of 61, Leonardo moved to Rome under the patronage of Giuliano de' Medici, the brother of the newly elected Pope Leo VI. This Roman period was artistically disappointing. While Michelangelo and Raphael were dominating the high-profile Vatican commissions, Leonardo was relegated to more eccentric scientific projects in the Belvedere Palace, including work on mirrors, optics, and industrial wax models. His time in Rome exposed the profound difference between Leonardo and his younger contemporaries. While Raphael effortlessly produced religious narratives and Michelangelo poured forth monumental sculpted forms, Leonardo struggled with organizing his vast scientific output, driven by an unquenchable thirst for knowledge rather than the simple desire to finish a product. His Roman years were spent less on creating and more on codifying his lifelong research. The necessity of organizing the thousands of loose pages of his notebooks became his final great intellectual undertaking. He began to organize his notes by subject, anatomy, water, flight, optics, intending to publish comprehensive treatises. His dedication to this task meant sacrificing painting entirely. This self-imposed shift reflected his final philosophical conclusion, that the ultimate purpose of his genius was not in the fleeting beauty of art, but in the immutable truth of science. He viewed the organized, rational presentation of knowledge as the highest form of contribution to humanity, far exceeding the momentary fame brought by a painting. In 1517 AC, Leonardo accepted the final and perhaps most honorable invitation of his career. He was invited by King Francis III of France to become the premier painter and engineer and architect to the king. Francis I, a young, brilliant patron of the arts, provided Leonardo with a substantial annual stipend, a comfortable manor house, Clos Lucé, near the royal residence at Amboise, and the only commission he truly sought, freedom from obligation and the time to think. This period in France was one of quiet dignity and respect. Leonardo was revered as a living monument to human intellect. He brought his essential notebooks and three of his most treasured paintings with him: the Mona Lisa, the Virgin and Child with Saint Anne, and the Saint John the Baptist. The king, who admired Leonardo's mind above all, reportedly spent hours discussing philosophy, art, and science with the aging master. Though his right hand was now partially paralyzed, making painting difficult, Leonardo continued his work in engineering and drawing, designing hydraulic systems for the royal court and supervising court festivals, continuing his lifelong commitment to both the practical and the aesthetic. His final years were spent mostly dictating his notes, organizing his legacy, and advising the young king. This final, stable period allowed him to bring a sense of order to the chaos of his intellectual output, ensuring that at least some of his work would survive him, even if publication remained incomplete. Leonardo da Vinci passed away on May 17, 19 AC, at the age of 67 in Clos Lucé, France. His death marked the close of the High Renaissance and the departure of the man whose curiosity had spanned the entire horizon of human knowledge. His true legacy, however, was not in the finished works he left behind, but in the sprawling, enigmatic notebooks he bequeathed to the world, a true portrait of the universal mind. Leonardo da Vinci's death marked the close of the High Renaissance and the departure of the man whose curiosity had spanned the entire horizon of human knowledge. His true legacy, however, was not in the finished works he left behind, but in the sprawling, enigmatic notebooks he bequeathed to the world, a true portrait of the universal mind. The next section will explore the fate of these notebooks, the key themes of his philosophical writings, and the enduring mystery of his most famous, yet unfinished artistic and scientific projects. Leonardo da Vinci's passing on May 2nd, 1519 AC, marked the close of the High Renaissance and the departure of the man whose curiosity had spanned the entire horizon of human knowledge. His true legacy, however, was not in the handful of finished paintings he left behind, but in the sprawling, enigmatic collection of notebooks he bequeathed to the world, a true portrait of the universal mind. The fate of these manuscripts, estimated to contain over 13,000 pages of drawings, notes, and diagrams, is one of the great intellectual tragedies of history. Had they been published immediately, they would have jump-started the scientific and technological revolution by decades, if not centuries. Upon his death, Leonardo entrusted his notebooks to his devoted friend and assistant, Francesco Melzi. Melzi, who understood the immense value of the collection, spent the remaining 50 years of his life painstakingly trying to organize the chaos of the papers, which contained musings on everything from botany to metaphysics, all written in Leonardo's unique mirror script. Melzi managed to organize a selection of notes on painting into a coherent treatise, the Treatise on Painting, Trattato della Pittura, which was later circulated in manuscript form and finally published in the 17th century. This treatise became highly influential in art academies, systematizing Leonardo's lessons on light, shadow, perspective, and the expressive nature of painting. However, upon Melzi's death, the vast collection was dispersed, sold, and often vandalized by subsequent owners who failed to grasp their scientific value, viewing them merely as curious drawings by a famous artist. The manuscripts were scattered across European libraries and private collections. Many were lost forever, and those that remained became known by names derived from their owners or formats, such as the Codex Atlanticus, the Codex Arundel, and the Codex Leicester. The themes contained within these fragmented notebooks reveal Leonardo's unique philosophical practice. He lived by a self-imposed methodology that prized constant questioning and empirical verification above all else. A core theme is the philosophy of saper vedere, knowing how to see. For Leonardo, true observation was an active intellectual process, not a passive one. It required the observer to move past the superficial appearance of things and penetrate the underlying physical laws and structures. His drawings are not records of what things look like, but of how they work. This is the methodological heart of his anatomical, hydrological, and aeronautical studies. Another crucial theme is the principle of universal analogy. Leonardo constantly sought connections between the microcosm and the macrocosm. He compared the branches of a tree to the capillaries in a lung, and the delta of a river to the veins and arteries of the human body. He saw the movement of water in a stream as directly analogous to the movement of air needed for flight, allowing him to transfer knowledge seamlessly across disciplines. This analogical thinking was his personal method of creating a unified field theory of existence, where art and science were inseparable forms of understanding the same rational universe. Beyond the scientific insights, the notebooks contain countless practical techniques developed for the working artist. His use of sfumato, as seen in the Mona Lisa, was a precise technical process. He achieved the smoky effect by applying multiple, extremely thin layers, glazes of paint, sometimes as many as 30 or more, allowing light to penetrate and scatter through the layers, creating an illusion of depth and eliminating harsh lines. He was also the Renaissance master of chiaroscuro, pronounced chiaroscuro, the dramatic contrast between light and shadow. He used light not just to illuminate objects, but to sculpt form and emphasize psychological drama, as seen in the intense focus on the figures in the Last Supper contrasted with the deep, enveloping shadows. The study of Leonardo's career is often dominated by his unfinished works, the Adoration of the Magus, the Battle of Anghiari, and the Gran Cavallo. While often cited as evidence of his chronic procrastination, these failures reveal a deeper truth about his method. Leonardo rarely considered a work finished. He considered it a perpetual experiment. His refusal to use the traditional stable fresco technique for the Last Supper and his use of experimental oils in the Battle of Anghiari show that the process of inquiry, the testing of new materials, pigments, and technical limits, was often more valuable to him than the final, stable product. The true purpose of the works was the discovery it facilitated. The great clay model of the Gran Cavallo was not just a symbol of his artistic ambition, it was a vast, structural engineering problem. The 12 years he spent on it were a continuous study in equine anatomy, statics, materials science, and industrial casting techniques, all of which enriched his theoretical knowledge far beyond the needs of the final statue. His lifelong habit of carrying the Mona Lisa with him and continually refining it with layers of glaze speaks to this relentless pursuit of the unattainable ideal, the perfect rendering of life, light, and psychological complexity. Leonardo's true legacy is not a set of finished theorems or a complete body of work, but the process of infinite curiosity. He remains the ultimate symbol of the Renaissance ideal, a conviction that the human intellect, driven by pure observation, could master every field of knowledge, using art as the tool for scientific inquiry and science as the foundation for artistic truth. His fragmented notebooks, now carefully preserved in museums and libraries around the world, are not just historical documents. They are a living invitation to embrace the interconnectedness of all knowledge and to constantly ask the most fundamental question of all: why? The organization of his genius, though incomplete in his lifetime, now allows us to reconstruct the breathtaking scope of his unified vision, a vision that has inspired thinkers, scientists, and artists for 5 centuries. The organization of his genius, though incomplete in his lifetime, now allows us to reconstruct the breathtaking scope of his unified vision, a vision that has inspired thinkers, scientists, and artists for 5 centuries. This vision was underpinned by a discipline that many overlook, the rigorous application of mathematics and geometry to the physical world. Leonardo did not see numbers as abstract entities, but as the invisible skeleton upon which the beauty of nature was hung. In this next phase of our journey through his mind, we must look at how Leonardo transitioned from the observation of objects to the observation of light and optics, a field he called the queen of all sciences. For Leonardo, the eye was the window to the soul, but more importantly, it was the primary instrument of the scientist. He became obsessed with the mechanics of vision, seeking to understand how light rays traveled through the air, how they hit the curved surface of the cornea, and how the brain inverted the image to make sense of the world. During his time in Milan and later in Rome, Leonardo conducted experiments that were precursors to the modern camera. He studied the camera obscura, a darkened room with a small hole that projects an external image onto a wall. By analyzing this phenomenon, he was able to theorize about the nature of linear perspective and the way shadows are cast. He meticulously classified shadows into two categories: the umbra, or the darkest part of the shadow, and the penumbra, the lighter fringed edge where light begins to bleed back in. This was not merely an artistic exercise for his paintings. It was a mathematical study of the behavior of photons, centuries before the term existed. His optical research led him to design various types of lenses and mirrors. He envisioned a giant magnifying glass that could be used to observe the surface of the moon, predating the telescope. He filled pages of his notebooks with the geometry of reflection and refraction, calculating the angles at which light would bounce off concave and convex surfaces. He was fascinated by the way a drop of water could act as a lens, magnifying the tiny veins of a leaf, and he applied this logic to his designs for spectacles and astronomical instruments. This mathematical rigor extended to his work in botany. While most artists of the Renaissance painted plants as decorative filler, Leonardo studied them with the precision of a biologist. He was the first to record the laws of phyllotaxis, the arrangement of leaves around a stem. He observed that many plants grow in a spiral pattern to ensure that the upper leaves do not completely shade the lower ones from the sun and rain. He also discovered the principle of dendrochronology, noting that the rings inside a tree trunk correspond to the years of its growth, and the varying thickness of those rings reflects the wetness or dryness of the seasons. His botanical drawings are more than just sketches. They are studies of the structural integrity of life. He analyzed how a trunk supports its branches through a mathematical ratio. The total thickness of all the branches of a tree at any given height is equal to the thickness of the main trunk. This rule of trees allowed him to render landscapes that felt fundamentally right to the human eye, even if the viewer couldn't explain why. As he aged, Leonardo's focus on the mathematical patterns of nature became even more pronounced in his architectural designs. He was deeply interested in the concept of the centrally planned church. Inspired by the geometry of the circle and the square, he designed structures that radiated outward from a central point, representing the perfection of God's creation. He worked on the plans for the Cathedral of Milan and consulted on the design of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. His architectural sketches were not just floor plans, they were three-dimensional bird's-eye views, a revolutionary way of visualizing space that allowed for a better understanding of structural loads and interior lighting. However, the weight of his unfinished projects often pressed upon him. In his late notebooks, there is a recurring sense of urgency and occasionally a profound melancholy. He would write, "Tell me if anything was ever done," in the margins of his pages, questioning his own productivity. But this self-doubt was the byproduct of a mind that was simply too large for a single lifetime. He was attempting to build a bridge between the medieval world of faith and the modern world of science, a bridge made of parchment and ink. His late years in the service of the French King Franciscans provided him with a unique opportunity to act as an urban designer and architect of state. At Romorantin, he planned a vast royal palace in a new city that would have been a masterpiece of Renaissance urbanism. He designed a system of canals that would allow the king to travel by boat from the palace directly to other royal residences. He envisioned houses with prefabricated components and sophisticated waste disposal systems. While the palace was never completed, his influence can be seen in the grand chateaux of the Loire Valley, such as Chambord, where the famous double helix staircase is widely attributed to his design, a structure where two people can ascend and descend without ever meeting, a physical manifestation of his love for complex geometry and movement. This period of his life was also marked by a deep, quiet spirituality that differed from the institutionalized religion of the time. Leonardo saw the divine in the proportions of a dragonfly's wing or the swirl of a hurricane. He believed that by understanding the laws of nature, one was coming closer to the prime mover. His art became increasingly symbolic. In his final painting, St. John the Baptist, the figure emerges from a profound, dark background, pointing upward with a mysterious smile that mirrors the Mona Lisa. Is a painting that seems to speak of a transition from the physical world he had mapped so meticulously to a realm of pure spirit and light. Despite the physical limitations of his final years, including the stroke that affected his right hand, Leonardo never stopped thinking. He used his left hand to continue his scientific sketches and to dictate his final thoughts to his assistant, Francesco Melzi. He became a father figure to the young king, who supposedly held Leonardo in his arms as he died, a scene depicted in many later romanticized paintings. Whether that specific detail is true or not, the reality was that the most powerful monarch in Europe recognized that he was losing a mind that was in itself a natural wonder. As we look back at the sheer volume of his output, we must realize that Leonardo was not a man who failed to finish his work. He was a man who understood that inquiry has no end. To finish a painting was to close a door on a question. By leaving so much unfinished, he left the doors open for us. His notebooks are a map of the possibilities of the human spirit. They show us that there is no boundary between the curiosity of a child and the rigor of a scientist, between the hand of an artist and the eye of an engineer. This realization brings us to the final summation of his life, a life that was a continuous, vibrating chord struck between the earth and the heavens. In the next section, we will look at the specific scientific firsts that Leonardo achieved, the inventions and theories that would not be validated for another 400 years, and we will explore the final, lasting mystery of how one man could contain so much of the universe within a single mind. We will look at the tools he used, the ink he made, and the legacy he left for the explorers of the future. This realization brings us to the final summation of his life, a life that was a continuous, vibrating chord struck between the earth and the heavens. The next section will look at the specific scientific firsts that Leonardo achieved, the inventions and theories that would not be validated for another 400 years, and we will explore the final, lasting mystery of how one man could contain so much of the universe within a single mind. We will look at the tools he used, the ink he made, and the legacy he left for the explorers of the future, examining the modern reconstructions of his machines and the secrets hidden in the chemical composition of his pigments. This realization brings us to the final summation of Leonardo da Vinci's life, a life that was a continuous, vibrating chord struck between the earth and the heavens. In this segment, we will look at the specific scientific firsts that Leonardo achieved, the inventions and theories that would not be validated, built, or formally theorized for another 400 years, and we will explore the final, lasting mystery of how one man could contain so much of the universe within a single mind. Leonardo's greatest scientific achievement was his ability to use drawing as a tool for predictive modeling. He did not just record the world, he extrapolated the future based on the fundamental laws he observed. Many of the designs sketched casually in his notebooks foreshadowed major 18th and 19th and 20th century technological breakthroughs. 1. Aeronautics and air resistance. Beyond his beautiful ornithopter and aerial screw designs, Leonardo was the first to mathematically define the principles necessary for successful flight. He conceptualized the crucial role of the cambered wing, the idea that a curved surface generates lift by forcing air to travel faster over the top surface than the bottom. This was a core principle of aerodynamics, later proven by Bernoulli. Furthermore, his design for the parachute was proven viable in the year 2000 AC, when a modern skydiver successfully used a parachute built exactly according to Leonardo's specifications, using only canvas and wood. The drawing, made around 1485 AC, demonstrated a flawless understanding of the relationship between surface area and air drag required to safely slow a human body's descent. This was one of the purest examples of his genius operating outside the practical constraints of his own time. 2. Hydraulic and mechanical engineering. Leonardo was a pioneer in the science of tribology, the study of friction and wear. He understood that reducing friction was essential for efficient machinery. To this end, he designed and sketched the first concepts for roller and ball bearings. He proposed using small, spherical balls placed between two moving surfaces to reduce resistance. This invention, which allows modern machinery and vehicles to function efficiently, was fully realized hundreds of years later. Crank and connecting rod mechanism. Though often credited to others, Leonardo's drawings clearly depict the use of a connecting rod to translate the rotational motion of a crank into reciprocating linear motion, a core element of the steam engine and the internal combustion engine. Gears and transmissions. His notebooks contain complex multi-stage gear systems, including designs for worm gears and bevel gears, meant to manage immense forces and change the axis of power transmission in complex machinery, often illustrated with the precision of a modern CAD program. His fascination with water led him to design a practical life preserver and numerous detailed plans for submersibles or underwater breathing apparatus. While the secrecy surrounding his military work often obscured his final intent, the notebooks contain sketches for a diving suit with tubes connecting to a float on the surface, an early concept for independent underwater exploration. 3. Anatomy, physiology, and optics. In anatomy, the depth of his findings was unparalleled. He was the first to accurately draw and describe the full articulation of the human spine with its subtle double S curve. His work on the eye was equally groundbreaking. He was the first to understand that the image on the retina is inverted and that the brain must reverse this image to create a coherent perception. Furthermore, his early experiments with using lenses directly against the eye to correct vision were precursors to the development of the contact lens, a concept born from his meticulous research into the cornea and the physics of refraction. Perhaps his most stunning physiological insight was his correct, functional description of the heart's aortic valve. He realized that the valve did not simply open and close passively. The shape of the sinus surrounding the valve creates a vortex of blood that assists in the smooth closing of the three cusps, preventing backflow. This active, dynamic description of the fluid mechanics within the heart was only visually proven with the aid of high-speed photography in the late 20th century. 4. Geology and paleontology. As detailed previously, Leonardo's empirical method made him the father of modern geology. He rejected the idea of the single, catastrophic flood and established the principles of stratigraphy, the slow chronological layering of rock and sediment; paleontology, the correct interpretation of fossils as remnants of ancient life, not tricks of nature; uniformitarianism, the theory that geological change occurs slowly over eons, driven by the same forces we see today: water erosion, wind, and seismic uplift. His understanding of deep time places him philosophically hundreds of years ahead of his contemporaries, whose worldview was constrained by the 6,000-year chronology derived from biblical accounts. The chemistry and materials of the master Leonardo's relentless experimentation extended even to the materials he used. His struggle with painting techniques, while often resulting in the failure of frescoes like the Last Supper, stemmed from a desire to find the perfect medium that would allow him to work as slowly and meticulously as his ideas required. He meticulously recorded the creation of his own pigments, varnishes, and inks. He detailed recipes for mixing colors, understanding the chemical reactions between lead-based white and sulfur-based blues. His sepia ink, often used in his drawings, was carefully compounded to achieve its specific shade and resistance to fading. The tragic irony of his life is that the very experimental curiosity that fueled his scientific breakthroughs often undermined his artistic durability. He was a scientist of materials in an age when material science was still rudimentary, meaning his brilliant, innovative methods, like the tempera and oil mix on the Last Supper, often condemned his masterpieces to decay. The mystery of the universal mind. The final mystery of Leonardo da Vinci is not what he discovered, but how he managed to integrate such vast, disparate fields of knowledge into a coherent whole. His genius was founded on a singular mental capacity, synesthesia, and pattern recognition. He was able to fluidly connect the visual data from a dissected muscle to the force vectors in a mechanical gear, and then connect that mechanical principle to the turbulent flow of water in a riverbed. He saw the same invisible mathematical principles governing the microcosm, the human body, and the macrocosm, the universe. His use of mirror writing is often debated, but it reveals a mind that operated non-linearly. By writing from left to right with his left hand, he may have been externalizing the thought process more directly, bypassing the conventional structure of language. The act of drawing and writing simultaneously, often with different hands, speaks to an extraordinary capacity for parallel processing and sustained attention, prosouche in the philosophical sense. The legacy he left us is not just a collection of historical artifacts. It is a profound philosophical challenge. Leonardo stands as the ultimate exemplar of human potential, proving that the highest artistic beauty and the most rigorous scientific truth are not opposing forces, but two inseparable perspectives on the same unified reality. His notebooks remain the blueprint for the ideal Renaissance figure, a being who sees the whole rather than the fragmented parts and finds the deepest beauty in the underlying rationality of existence. His journey from a simple, illegitimate birth in a quiet Tuscan village to a philosopher advising kings and mapping the inner workings of the human heart serves as a timeless reminder that the greatest discoveries are made when we dare to look at the world not through the eyes of authority, but through the unflinching clarity of our own observation. The final segment will bring our journey to a close by synthesizing his artistic philosophy with his scientific methodology, leaving us with the enduring image of the universal mind and his lasting influence on the world he sought to master. The final segments will bring our journey to a close by synthesizing Leonardo da Vinci's artistic philosophy with his scientific methodology, leaving us with the enduring image of the universal mind and his lasting influence on the world he sought to master. The next section will explore the ultimate philosophical meaning of sprezzatura in his art, the concept of the genius in the Renaissance context, and the final, beautiful cohesion of his life's work. The journey through the life of Leonardo da Vinci has been a passage through a mind of impossible scope, from the anatomical precision of the human heart to the turbulent chaos of the deluge studies, from the subtle smile of the Mona Lisa to the cold, rational mechanics of the aerial screw. The final segment of our exploration brings us to the ultimate philosophical meaning of his life's work, the complete synthesis of his artistic and scientific endeavors, leaving us with the enduring image of the universal mind and his lasting influence on the world he sought to master. Leonardo's greatness was defined by his understanding that the goal of painting was not mere imitation, but philosophical truth. He elevated the artist from a simple craftsman to a philosopher-scientist, asserting that painting was the highest science because it required the application of mathematics, optics, anatomy, and psychology simultaneously. His pursuit of grace, grazia, in his art was the culmination of his scientific knowledge. He aimed to achieve sprezzatura, the Renaissance ideal of effortless elegance, which required deep mechanical knowledge to execute. The figures in his paintings possess a calm internal composure, even in moments of high drama, because Leonardo understood the precise muscle structure beneath the skin. For example, the fluid arrangement of the drapery around his figures, often achieved through meticulous studies of wet cloth draped over clay models, required a physical, mechanical understanding of weight, gravity, and fluid dynamics. The beauty in his art is not accidental. It is the aesthetic result of rational calculation. This is the core of his synthesis. The natural world is beautiful because it is perfectly rational, and the artist's task is to reveal that inherent rationality. The Renaissance concept of genius. In the time of Leonardo, the term genius, ingenium, was undergoing a transformation. It moved away from the classical idea of a guiding spirit external to the individual and toward the modern understanding of an innate, exceptional creative ability. Leonardo embodies this shift. His creative energy was seen as a force of nature, almost divine in its capacity to generate new ideas. He never achieved the public, institutional success of his rivals, Raphael and Michelangelo. He was always an outsider, illegitimate, lacking classical education, and prone to abandoning projects in favor of new scientific inquiries. Yet it was precisely this outsider status that allowed him to see the world without the academic filters of his time. He was free to question Aristotle on geology and Galen on anatomy. His true genius lay in his radical intellectual independence. His methodology provided a powerful template for future scientific inquiry based on 4 principles: empiricism, trusting only what the senses confirm; visualization, using drawing, the universal language, to analyze, model, and explain complex phenomena; cross-discipline analogy, applying principles learned in one field, like water dynamics, directly to another, like air dynamics or blood flow; continuous correction, never settling for a final answer, but perpetually refining the model through observation; the lasting footprint in the modern world. The scattered brilliance of Leonardo's notebooks continues to influence us, not just historically, but practically. His influence is felt strongly in several modern fields: biomedical illustration. His methods of layered drawing, cross-sections, and exploded views are the gold standard for anatomical illustration to this day. His detailed drawings are often more accurate and functionally descriptive than early photographs. Architecture and urban planning. His plans for ideal cities, emphasizing multi-level transportation and sophisticated sanitation, remain foundational to modern urban design theories aimed at improving public health and managing complex infrastructure. Art conservation. The ongoing struggle to preserve the Last Supper and the Mona Lisa has driven immense advancements in conservation science, involving chemical analysis of pigments and environmental controls that directly address the failures of Leonardo's experimental materials. Every time a conservator works on one of his pieces, they are interacting with his original, flawed, and brilliant chemical process. In a world increasingly dominated by specialization, Leonardo da Vinci stands as a crucial, necessary antidote. He challenges the modern mind to reject artificial boundaries between disciplines. He compels us to remember that the scientist should possess the painter's eye for beauty, and the artist should possess the engineer's rigor for truth. His life was a perpetual act of seeking cohesion in complexity. He found the divine not in dogma, but in the harmonious order of creation. He viewed the vast universe, the human body, and the flight of a bird as equally wondrous manifestations of the same single rational principle. The story of Leonardo is ultimately the story of potential unbound. He reminds us that the only true limits are the ones we impose upon our own curiosity. His unfinished works and his fragmented notebooks are not monuments to failure, but invitations to continue the great inquiry. They are a testament to the fact that the human mind, when dedicated to unblinking observation and fearless experimentation, can indeed become a mirror of the universe itself. The journey ends here, but the quest to understand the mechanisms of the world, the quest begun by Leonardo 5 centuries ago, is a journey that remains eternally open to all who possess the courage to question, the patience to observe, and the clarity to draw what they truly see. The universal mind is not an historical artifact. It is an enduring aspiration,